Good morning, everybody. It is a nice warm day. Again, it's a little later. The mornings are still a little bit too cold. And I got up to watch the Starship launch. I think it launched it. Well, they started talking about it about 7:30, and about 8:30 it launched. It was successful again, but with problems. So every time they do this, they learn something. But I don't know, I think God kind of laughs at man's attempt to do things, to get around in this universe. He's always there, it doesn't matter. Okay, so if you're out and you need to talk to people in a group, I'm trying to give you some stuff to help prepare you for that as you've been watching my last couple of videos. But someone's going to ask you, prove to me that God exists. If you prove to me God exists, I'll believe. Well, no, they won't, because even if God were to come and stand right before them and say, I'm God, what do you want to see in the way of miracles? I'll do anything you want. They still would deny it because they're being programmed by the devil. And until they are ready to surrender themselves, they won't accept any evidence. So you're not going to convince some people. But if you're in a group setting, and there's some guys on YouTube that are doing this now, and I like watching them, they're asking questions. Prove to me God exists. And he'll say, well, okay, I'll prove to you God exists if you can prove to me that we are really here talking. How do you prove that we are really here talking, that this isn't a dream of yours or a dream of mine? How do you prove it? You can't prove it. You can infer it. We're having a conversation, so therefore one of us must be here to have this conversation. So we can infer that God exists, but we can't prove it. And ultimately, we can't even prove the relationship with Jesus. That's where faith comes in. Okay, but we're not going to get into that. We're not going to discuss faith with people that don't even want to accept God. We talked about it before. How can God be so cruel in a world? Well, God is not. We're in man's dominion right now. But how do you convince somebody God exists? Well, you want to convince them by looking at order and design. Since we can't really prove that he exists, we got to basically infer that he exists by looking at existences around us and thinking, these couldn't be happening unless God designed them and placed them here. Now, the best place to look on that, because I mean, you can always argue that something out in space is, random. They came up with the Big Bang Theory, which, by definition, in the name, it's a theory. They don't know. So the bottom line is, pick something that we can actually get our hands around, and life is the best way. The theory, again, theory of evolution, has no proof, none whatsoever. But it's become normalized because it is anti-God. That's simply the only reason that it still exists. Normally things that can't prove themselves go by the wayside. So we're going to look at that today. Is there an intelligent design to life? Now, we can't prove God did it, but we can infer God did it because he's the only one that can. So first off, let's try to define intelligent design. If you walk into a room at night, and I'm picking nighttime just because it eliminates daytime issues, but at night, and you walk into a room and it is well lit, what can you conclude from that? That there's electricity in the room and somebody's turned on a light switch. Or if the room is dark and you flip on a light switch, you know that the lights are going to light because there's electricity in the room or in the house that you're in. How did it get there? Did it get there naturally? No, of course not. An architect designer designed the house, drew the plans up, said where the wiring is supposed to go, put plugs on the wall, and when you flip the switch on, it provides power to that plug, which provides power to the lamp that you got plugged into it. That's all intelligent design. It didn't happen randomly. If it happened randomly, then I would expect to be driving around in the countryside and finding trees with refrigerators growing on them. You say, that's absurd. Of course it's absurd. To say that the universe is random is also absurd. Okay, so if we didn't get there by evolution, and there are minor cases of evolution between various generations or species, but we're talking about the evolution of man from single-cell creatures that happened to develop on a planet that was forming. That's that theory of evolution. So we're going to look at that and see whether or not we can argue the point that it has to be by intelligent design. Okay, so if the electrician's responsible for the design of the house, God will be responsible for the design of life. So let's do a little bit of biology 101. I'll try not to go in depth on this too much because, one, it's not my field. My field was physics. I studied physics in school and mathematics, but then I got a job working at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in Palo Alto, California. And in talking with the physicists, I concluded, one, they're never going to figure it out because they don't know how to think outside the box. And two, what are they going to do with it if they come up with it? They're not going to make themselves big and powerful like God. That's what Satan wants to do. And it can never be achieved. So, let's talk about some basic biology. Look at the human being. We're gonna step back in a second, but look at a human being. There are 100 trillion cells that make up a human body. That's a big difference between a one-celled organism, bacteria type thing, and higher smart creatures like humans, and I use that term loosely. Now, the evolutionists will say that we came out from a one cell and they developed up the chain until we got higher celled animals. Now, can we look around and find single cell organisms? Yes, we can. I'm going to read a little bit out of a book. Single-celled organisms are referred to as unicellular organisms. These are prokaryotic organisms, mostly bacteria and some algae are unicellular in nature. It is a primitive form of life. So we've got today the existence of what they can claim, and we can kind of agree, would be closer to what could have happened if they had actually happened. Okay. Now, there are no two-cell organisms in existence. There are no three-cell, no four-cell. Now, they've been able to, in the lab, push two cells together and they make a barrier between them. It's more like you keep over on your side and I'll keep over on my side. There's still two individual working cells that this barrier just separates them. And that's only by intelligent design do we have that. You don't have it in nature. And that goes for 3 and 4 and all the way up. So you can't do this outside of a lab. There are millimeter long worms, tiny worms that are easy to grow in a lab, and they can be manipulated genetically. So they play around with these. There are about 1,000 cells. So pretty much there's a major gap in going from that. How do you get, and then from 1 to 1,000, and nothing in between. And we found no fossil records, no other kind of records. We found records with one cells, with bacteria on it and algae and stuff. We've got fossilized records of that, but we don't have anything. Now, let's talk about what it takes to make a cell. Now, most cells that exist in living organisms have DNA. And again, biology is not mine. I forget what the D stands for. Nucleic acid. It's an acid. If you put an acid and a base together, they kind of neutralize each other. They cancel each other out. It's very difficult to make the building blocks. The building blocks we have never been able to build in a lab, in a controlled environment. We can make this set of building blocks over here, but this set over here, when we make it, if it's in close proximity to the first group, it destroys the first group of building blocks. They don't develop the same way, and yet you've got to put them together. So there has to be a third, a catalyst, to be able to bring them together. We can't create that properly. So we have never been able to do this. If they can't produce it, it's still a theory. Now, 99% of the cells have DNA. DNA has a billion connections inside of it, with a billion squared. I don't know what the mathematical calculation is of how many options we've got. We've got 8 billion people on the earth. They think that maybe there's been 20 billion from the beginning of time till now, and they haven't even scratched the surface of the number of DNA options for producing human beings. It's very complex. And just before I go on to the next step, the only cells that don't have DNA, red blood cells, older red blood cells, dump their DNA so they can carry more oxygen. We're the only creature that does that. Other animals don't. Our DNA starts in a red cell when it's formed, but as it matures, it gets rid of it so it's got more room to put oxygen in. And things like hair, your fingernails, stuff like that, you cannot have DNA. If you need to see DNA from hair, you got to get to the root. Okay. So DNA is pretty much everywhere. Covered that part. So DNA is a noun, a self-replicating material that is present in nearly all living organisms as the main constituent of chromosomes. It is the carrier of genetic information. If you want to see a cat or a dog or a person, DNA controls that. And it's pretty much the same all around. It's just different in its computer programming, if you want to call it that. It's a double strand. You've seen the helix of it as it winds down and there's connections in between. If you cut it down the middle, they're mostly mirror images. It's how you create children. If you split it down the middle and you take half from here and half from here and put them together, and you have a new human being. That's when babies are truly born. The neat thing about DNA is it's self-repairing up to a point. If a part of it gets damaged, and we're constantly being bombarded by cosmic rays. I started off in the shade. It didn't take long, did it? I'm not going to move again. These building blocks can repair themselves. If you take out a small section, the sides of it that it was broken from can go back in and rebuild that section in most cases. The only part of the DNA that's susceptible to permanent damage are the outer edges, because there's not two sides. If you go all the way to the outer edges, you've got one side, but you don't have the other side. So it's got nothing to compare to build it back. Guess where our immune system is? On the outer edges. Which I think is one of the reasons that we don't live as long as we do, and we have problems with diseases and that as we get older, because the body can't fight them. The body can fight pretty much anything. We should live to be 1,000 years. In pre-flood, they did. Pre-flood, the earth was completely covered by water. So how do you know that? Because God gave them a rainbow. They had never seen a rainbow before. The only way to have a sky without a rainbow is 100% water covering. Period. Now, those that want to argue that the earth is 6,000 years old, I'm going to go off on a rabbit trail. God could have created the earth in 6,000 years. If he wanted to, he's God. But he doesn't wave magic wands around. He didn't start this thing going and go, we're just going to see where it goes and I'll jump in every once in a while when I need to. That's not how he did this. He designed our universe, our world of existence, from the beginning all the way to the end, and he knows where it's at every step of the way. And every time something happens, he already knew that because he created it to happen. That's an intelligent design, as opposed to a reactionary thing going, oops, Pharaoh's after them, let's divide the sea. Quick, get out there and open the sea up and let them get across. No. He divided the sea on that particular day and had the Israelites get there on that particular day, cross over, and it might have taken 2 or 3 days because there was 1 million people coming out of Egypt, and then let it close back in and swallow the army. He planned that at the beginning to happen on that date. That's intelligent design. Okay, but we don't want to get over too far on that because these people don't believe in God yet. So, if we know that the DNA can repair itself, except for cosmic rays, we want to look at these pairs and realize that every combination, we know that we can talk to somebody in what they used to do during the World War I. They used Morse code, and back in the 1800s, they used Morse code. Did it, dot, dot, did it, dot. I don't remember the order, but SOS, save our ship, is either dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, 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 or reverse it. Dash, 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 dot, 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 dash, dash, dash. But if you just keep repeating those combinations, somebody's going to know what you're doing and talking about. So that's all you need to do. If you're going to knock on a bulkhead to get to the person in the other room, do the 3 dots and the 3 dashes continually. Or if you got a light switch, just flick it on and off the same way. Dots are quick, dashes are slow. Okay, there's your SOS. DNA is basically an enormous version of that. I'll compare it to a computer program. Talking back to our intelligent design room, your light switch is a 1-bit binary computer. It's either on or it's off. If on means something and off means something, then you can communicate. There are trillions of light switches in computer chips. And you just have to know how to program all those. The same thing for DNA. And I think that I had the number, I think I said 1 billion. There's 3.16 billion base pairs in each human cell in DNA. Okay, made up of like 46 different chromosomes to make up a human cell. We've never made life from scratch. And we know how to build, we know what the building blocks are. We have never been able to build them. We've never created life in a lab. Now somebody's going to say, well, yes they have. They created a green monkey. Okay, They have never from scratch created life in a lab. They have modified life by messing with the DNA and doing other things as part of the creation. Artificial insemination, we can create life that way. We can grow life in a test tube, if you will, if you've got the components. But we can't create the components. Only God can do that. That's intelligent design. Now, when we look at the world and we see that there are human remains, we can call them that, whether they're truly human or not, we can't really get DNA out of petrified objects. You have to have something that died relatively living. We can get DNA out of a mastodon found in Siberia, who happens in Siberia where it's freezing cold most of the time, and he's got lush green food in his stomach. So times were definitely different on the earth. But we found human footprints in mud that got covered over and turned into rock. We've also got dinosaur footprints. We've got paintings on walls showing daily life. Some of them they're saying they're, 100,000 years ago, maybe 200 or 300,000. When we look at the pyramids, we go, we have no idea how these were built. Yeah, I know, you've seen pictures in school where they're dragging big monster stones up with the, 10,000 people pulling on a rope. But they don't know. There's no proof of it. That's speculation. It's the same speculation when they say they found an inhabitable or a habitable planet in another solar system, in another galaxy. It's speculation. They even draw the planet up. Artists can do that. But they have no idea. It is such a minute change in our orbit. The squirrels are chasing each other. I keep looking at it. If you move our planet used to spin straight, and right now it's not. It's wobbling. But just that little bit of wobble going to and from the sun can cause winter and summer. Imagine if it was 100 million miles further out, or even further in. It'd be an entirely different planet to live on. And life may not survive very well. Now, humans know how to adapt. But you got to have time to adapt. If you don't have time, then you die like the dinosaurs. All right, so we have all this, and they come back and they say, well, these are signs of early humans. Because they see human design. Well, we show you signs of God, and you deny it. You can't have it both ways. God is the only reasonable explanation that people can have for why we have what we have. You're not going to convince everybody. It's impossible. There are people, like I said, if you were to send them to heaven and let them see everything, they still wouldn't believe. I'm done with my notes. So the best we can do is try. You plant seeds. If you can't actually manage the ground and till the ground, you plant seeds. That's all you can do. And you plant it on whatever ground you're given. You have the parable of the seeds falling on rock and on places where there's weeds and brambles. And if it falls into good soil, it'll develop. You can't control any of that. You just, Johnny Appleseed, you've got your seeds with you, and you just throw them wherever you can. And if they take root, great. If they don't, the opportunity was there. The people can't say they never had the opportunity. Oh, they could say it, but they're easily be proven that they don't know what they're talking about, because it would be brought back to their memory every time somebody tried to help them. and they refuse to listen. Just do your part. I can't see in the sun. How are we doing on time? Yeah, we're good. So let me wrap it up by saying just do the best you can. Don't get discouraged. You will have good days and bad days in talking about God. You will find some people who are not prepared. They say, I can't read the Bible, it's full of errors. Say, okay, prove it. Show me an error in the Bible. I'll be back next week. Show me an error in the Bible. In that week, if you're not already familiar with it, you can look up the half a dozen or so places where there are errors. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing major. Nothing that changes the subject. And they're going to say, well, the Bible was written long after the fact, hundreds of years after the fact. Nobody was around. No, you're confusing the Bible with the Quran. People wrote about all this stuff in the first century. A lot of it was destroyed, but not 100%. And people kept, recreating this stuff. And they didn't have printing presses back then. So it actually had to have somebody sit down, like the Old Testament scribes used to do, and put one copy here and put a blank piece of paper here and just copy one, letter at a time until you got it fully copied. We had people willing to die for their belief in Jesus. Nobody's going to die for a lie. Now, if they're convinced by Satan that it's the truth, they might die for it, and they often do. But so they actually believe the lie. But nobody's going to die for something that they know is a lie. Okay. Take the happy face out there, smile, and tell people about God. And that you're not worried about anything that's going to happen, but they need to be. See you in the clouds.